The first ticket came on a Monday. A plain white envelope, tucked neatly beneath my front door mat, stamped with the Ridgeview Shores HOA seal. Inside, a typed letter. Violation. Unauthorized recreational use of HOA property. Fishing on common grounds. Fine. $250. Payment due within 14 days to avoid further penalties. I stood on my porch, blinking at the paper as if reading it wrong. I hadn't been throwing a party, blaring music, or setting off fireworks. I'd been fishing. A single cast off the same weathered dock my father and I had used for decades. I looked out toward the lake.
Calm.
Quiet. A silver shimmer rippled beneath the morning sun. Not a soul in sight. It was ours, had always been. Or so I thought. That evening, I walked into the monthly HOA meeting with the letter folded in my pocket. I didn't expect a confrontation. I expected a mistake, someone clicking the wrong box on a form, an apology, maybe even a chuckle. Instead, I walked into a tribunal. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a freshly painted hall with beige walls and zero warmth. At the center table sat Carol Winslow, HOA president, retired principal, and Ridgeview Shores self-appointed queen bee. To her left and right were her ever-loyal board members. Todd, who measured his self-worth in inches of manicured lawn, and Brenda, who once fined a neighbor for planting lavender instead of hydrangeas. Carol adjusted her glasses and nodded as I approached. "Mr. Rourke," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We saw your name on the docket." I pulled out the notice. "You fined me for fishing." "That's correct. On my own dock." "That dock is on common lakefront property. As outlined in Section 3A of the Ridgeview Shores Covenant, recreational activities on shared grounds require pre-approval and adherence to established guidelines. Fishing is not permitted at this time." I stared at her. "Carol, that dock predates this HOA. My dad built it. We've been casting lines there since the 90s. No one's ever had an issue." She folded her hands like a judge preparing a sentence. "The board updated the rules last quarter. Fishing encourages litter, attracts waterfowl, and disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the lake. The new policy is meant to preserve tranquility." Todd chimed in. "It's about appearances. Hooks, buckets, tackle. It looks unkempt." "I cleaned up after myself," I said. "There wasn't even a footprint left behind." Carol tapped her pen against the table. "Regardless,
The rule stands.
this isn't personal."
But it was.
Because for years, I'd resisted Carol's creeping control over the neighborhood. I refused to remove my mailbox and replace it with a approved model. I didn't trim my sycamore when they said it was leaning defiantly. And now, fishing, a quiet, harmless tradition, had become their next battleground. I glanced around the room. The other residents sat in silence, eyes averted. No one spoke. Not even Mr. Delgado, who used to bring his grandkids down to the lake on weekends. They'd been friends of my father. But now, like the others, he kept his head down. Carol dismissed me with a final nod. "Pay the fine and refrain from further violations. We appreciate your understanding." I left without another word. Outside, the evening sky blushed with streaks of orange and red, the lake shimmering like melted copper. It didn't feel like home anymore. When I got back to my porch, I sat on the steps and listened. The crickets had begun their chorus. A pair of ducks skimmed across the far end of the lake, cutting small wakes into the glassy water. I looked down at the violation notice. 100 memories flashed through my mind. Early morning casts with Dad. Lazy summer afternoons with a cooler by my side. The quiet joy of waiting. Not for the fish, but for the stillness. The connection.
They wanted to take that from me.
Over a rule no one voted on. Imposed by a board no one dared to challenge. A rule that turned my heritage into a misdemeanor. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I read every line of the Ridgeview bylaws. I pulled up property maps, county records, lake access easements. I studied every loophole, clause, and contradiction. Because if they thought a fine would stop me, they didn't understand what they'd just awakened. Fishing was just the beginning. I cast again the next morning. Same rod, same dock, same quiet lake. A defiant ritual. The air was crisp, the water glass smooth. As the line arced into the blue, I felt a sliver of peace slice through the anger boiling in my chest. It lasted 3 minutes. Then the golf cart appeared. Carol's enforcer, Doug, rounded the bend, his reflective vest puffed up like a badge of honor. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, sneakers squeaking on the wooden planks. "You're in violation again, Mr. Rourke." I reeled in slowly, deliberately. "Doug, do you even fish?"
He frowned.
"That's irrelevant."
"No, it's not."
"Because if you did, you'd understand this isn't a crime. It's a man casting a line into the lake his father helped preserve."
He didn't respond.
Just scribbled on the citation pad and slapped the fresh notice onto the nearest post. By noon, 2 more tickets had been taped to my door. By sunset, a notice of pending legal action arrived, threatening further fines, suspension of community privileges, and potential lien proceedings. They weren't just pushing, they were declaring war. I could have stopped, paid the fines, packed up the rods, played nice. But I knew something they didn't. They were bluffing. And while they were busy playing politics, I was preparing something bigger. I began my deep dive. The HOA bylaws were a labyrinth, but one thing stood out. The Ridgeview Shores HOA did not own the lake. They managed access under a lease, one originally granted by a land trust formed in the early 2000s. That lease, I discovered, had quietly lapsed the previous year after the trust defaulted on its property taxes. The water rights were in limbo. No one owned them, yet. I paid a visit to the county recorder's office. The clerk, a gray-haired man named Carl, raised an eyebrow when I explained what I was looking for. "You're saying the lake's owner disappeared?" "No," I replied. "I'm saying the HOA thinks they own it, but they're floating on expired paperwork." He pulled the file. It confirmed what I suspected. The trust had been dissolved, and the county was preparing to reassign the parcel, lake and all. "Technically," Carl said, tapping the folder, "if you file a claim and pay the back taxes, it's yours." "How much?" He slid the paper across the desk. $8 for 12. And a few signatures. I didn't hesitate. Within the week, I had filed the purchase intent, paid the dues, and retained a property lawyer to accelerate the title transfer. Every move was deliberate, quiet,
strategic.
I said nothing to the HOA, but I watched their next steps with eagle-eyed focus. They escalated. They passed an emergency motion to ban fishing equipment in public view, meaning I couldn't even store my rod outside. They dispatched a security patrol to monitor compliance. Doug started parking outside my house, snapping pictures like a low-rent paparazzo. Then came the knock at my door. It was Carol. She stood on my porch in a coral blazer, lips tight, hands folded in a way that screamed restrained superiority. "I wanted to speak civilly," she began, "before this spirals further." "Civil would have been asking before fining," I said. She ignored the jab. "The community has rules. No one is above them. Your continued fishing violates those rules, and it's causing unnecessary division." I folded my arms. "You made the rules without input. You declared the lake common property without a vote. That's not leadership, it's a power grab." Carol's nostrils flared. "I'm warning you, Mr. Rourke. If you continue this behavior, we'll pursue legal action. Real action." I smiled. "You should do that." Because by then, the deed was nearly finalized. As she stormed down the steps, I watched her go with the calm of a man holding a checkmate in his pocket. She thought she was issuing a warning, but she had no idea she was standing on the edge of her own downfall. That night, I walked down to the dock again. Cast once.
Twice.
Then I just sat there, feet swinging, rod resting on the boards. The moon lit up the water like liquid silver. Let them find me, I thought. Because in a few days, I wouldn't be a violator. I'd be the owner. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, thicker than the usual junk mail, sealed in legal blue, and stamped with the emblem of the county registrar. I opened it with steady hands, but a pounding heart. Inside, a certified deed transfer, notarized and complete. Parcel 11B, 17, Lake Ridgeview and surrounding access trail, comprising 23 acres of water and shorefront.
Mine.
The moment was quiet, anticlimactic even. No fireworks. No dramatic soundtrack. Just paper, ink, and a new reality that shifted everything. I didn't waste time. The next day, I filed a notice of ownership with the HOA, hand-delivered to Carol's door in a manila envelope marked urgent. Inside were copies of the deed, a letter from my lawyer, and a simple one-page policy update. Effective immediately, Ridgeview Shores HOA is no longer authorized to access, patrol, or regulate Lake Ridgeview or its shorefront without written consent from the landowner.
Me.
I expected silence. What I got was rage. At exactly 4 p.m., Carol marched down the cul-de-sac like a general entering hostile territory, trailed by Todd and Brenda. I was in my garage, oiling my reels, when I heard the familiar screech of her sandals on concrete. "You think this is a game?" she snapped, waving the letter like a sword.
I didn't stand.
"No game, Carol. Just property rights. You manipulated the system, snuck behind our backs, and bought community land." "Not community land," I corrected. "The HOA had a lease. It expired. I did what any responsible citizen would. I acquired unclaimed land before someone else misused it." Todd stepped forward. "You can't just cut off the entire neighborhood from the lake." "I can," I said, and I did. Carol's face was a portrait of fury, tight-lipped, twitching eyes, crimson blooming across her cheeks. "This won't stand," she hissed. "We'll contest it. We'll call the county." "You're welcome to," I replied. "But the county's already approved it. And since the HOA never held a vote to renew the lease or disclose its lapse, any challenge from your board will only highlight gross mismanagement." That shut her up. For a moment, Brenda muttered something about selfishness, but even she looked uncertain now. Carol turned away, but not before delivering one final, venom-laced promise. "You just made an enemy of the board, Mr. Rourke." "I didn't," I said quietly. "You made enemies of your neighbors." I just held up a mirror. They left without another word. By the weekend, I installed signs around the lake perimeter. "Private property, no trespassing without permission. Violators will be prosecuted." I added a gate to the trailhead, then contracted a local firm to install motion-activated cameras. Not because I feared retaliation, but because I wanted the HOA to know every move around my lake was now monitored. That Sunday, the fallout began. The HOA Facebook group exploded. Photos of the new signage, angry threads, neighbors asking how this happened. Carol tried to control the narrative, blaming me for robbing the community of its shared heritage. But others weren't buying it. Old-timers like Mr. Delgado began to speak up. He posted, "I remember when fishing was allowed. When we used to bring our grandkids down to the water. You banned that, Carol. You took that from us." Another neighbor added, "He didn't steal the lake. He saved it from your rules." Support quietly shifted. People began knocking on my door, not with complaints, but with requests. Could they bring their kids to fish? Could they paddleboard again? Could I reopen the dock? I said yes to all of them, but only under one condition: no HOA interference. No rules, no fines, no forms. Just permission and respect. It felt like reclaiming something bigger than property. It felt like restoring balance. But I wasn't done. A week later, I submitted a formal petition to audit the HOA board. Citing lease mismanagement, unauthorized rule changes, and failure to disclose material information to members, I called for a community-wide vote to dissolve the current leadership. Carol tried to block it, but the tide had turned. The same people she'd silenced for years now lined up with pens in hand. The vote passed by a landslide. Carol, Todd, and Brenda were out by the month's end. Power, like water, finds new currents. And mine was just starting to flow. Summer arrived like an exhale. Gone were the board's passive-aggressive newsletters and cryptic violations about lawn lengths or mailbox color. With the HOA leadership dissolved and a temporary committee elected, the community finally took a breath. A real one. The kind you take after holding it far too long. I opened the dock officially on Memorial Day weekend. No ribbon cutting. No grand announcement.
Just a small sign that read,
Welcome to Rourke's Landing, community fishing permitted. No HOA oversight required. And people came. Fathers and daughters baited hooks. Old couples strolled the shore. Kids who'd only known the lake as off-limits finally splashed in its shallows. I stood under the shade of my father's old tackle shed and watched as life returned to the water. It was more than revenge. It was restoration. Carol moved out a month later. Word was she'd listed the house quickly, citing hostility and loss of order as reasons. But the truth? She lost control. And without control, she was just another neighbor. That was a role she couldn't play. Doug stopped patrolling soon after. I think he realized the authority he wielded wasn't real. It was borrowed, brittle, and gone with a signature. Funny how quickly people abandon a sinking ship once the mast snaps. But not everyone vanished. Some stayed, stepped up, helped heal. Brenda, surprisingly, came to me one evening, a little awkward, holding a tray of lemon bars. I was just following Carol's lead, she said. We all were. I didn't realize how far we'd strayed. I took a lemon bar and nodded. It's never too late to fix things. She left with a lighter step than she arrived. Later that summer, the community voted on a new bylaw structure, this time with full transparency and input. The lake, while privately owned by me, was written into a public use easement agreement. I set the terms: no development, no fencing, no HOA jurisdiction. In exchange, I granted perpetual access to all residents, free of charge. They didn't clap when it passed. They stood in silence, then applauded with the weight of something real, something earned. I added a memorial bench by the water. On it, a plaque. For those who cast lines not to catch, but to connect. In memory of Jack Rourke. My dad would have liked that. He always said the lake wasn't about fish. It was about peace. About pausing the noise. The HOA tried to turn it into a chess piece. I turned it back into sanctuary. Still, there were moments I sat on the dock and wondered, what if I'd just paid the fine? Let it go? Swallowed their rules and moved on? But then I'd see a kid catch his first fish, or an old veteran like Mr. Delgado wipe a tear as he sat beside the water, and I'd know, some fights are worth it. Not because they're big, but because they're right. On the final Sunday of August, I hosted a community cookout by the lake. Not an HOA event. Just neighbors sharing food, stories, space. Someone brought a radio. Someone else grilled catfish caught just hours before. As the sun sank, painting the water gold, a boy tugged on my shirt. Mr. Rourke, he said, eyes wide. Is it true you own the lake? I smiled. Yep. He looked at it, then back at me. That's awesome. But why'd you let us all use it? I crouched to his level. Because owning something doesn't mean keeping it to yourself. Sometimes it means protecting it, so everyone can enjoy it. He nodded, as if storing the wisdom like a rare marble, then ran off, giggling, his rod bouncing on his shoulder. I stood, watching him disappear into the shoreline crowd. That's when I felt it. The full-circle stillness. Not silence, but calm. Earned, not imposed. The kind of peace you don't find in rules or fines or position, but in choice. And for the first time since all of it began, since the fines, the threats, the war, I cast my line into the lake with nothing but still water, open sky, and a community that had finally remembered how to live together. No HOA needed.